Kalev at the Megan Center. I'm in charge of the English public events and educational seminars and various content that we provide for English speakers here at the center. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. And it's a great pleasure for me to be hosting another collaboration with my friend Kalev, whose book, Judaism 3.0, has inspired a lot of great conversations here and elsewhere about Zionism, about Jewish identity, Israel's place in the Jewish world, and other things. The topic that we're going to be discussing this evening, anti-Zionism and its relationship with anti-Semitism, is a topic that has been, I think, part of the conversation in the Jewish world for a long time. Certainly I remember it even 20, 30 years ago, during the days of the Second Intifada, when there was a lot of anti-Zionism in London, where I used to live, and we first started to see this sort of seeping over of anti-Zionism into overt anti-Semitism. As it's a topic that I've thought about quite a lot and written about, I'm going to, with Gal's permission, I'm going to chime in a little bit in the debate later with some thoughts of my own, but I'm certainly going to leave most of the speaking time to our guests. Don't worry about that. We're going to hear from not just Gal, who's going to present his thesis, but also our special guests, Fleur Hassan-Nahum and Uri Zaki, who I'll introduce formally later. But first of all, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, the one and only Gal Kalev, author of Judaism 3.0. He's also the chair of the Judaism 3.0 think tank, which was formerly the American-Israel Friendship League think tank, which was the place where the ideas of the book were first deliberated. And we actually celebrated the renaming or the inauguration, re-inauguration of the think tank here a few months ago. I want to say that, and I think this is important, perhaps also for this evening, that to his great credit, Gal welcomes, encourages debate, disagreement, argument about the theses, and without going too much into it, I think at this time we could do with civil disagreement, perhaps now more than other times. Gal is a journalist. He's written about geopolitical issues, long-term global shifts, and Zionism. His articles have appeared in the Jerusalem Post, the Jerusalem Report, Newsweek, Foreign Policy, and other places. He's a prolific researcher of Theodor Herzl, getting into the depths of the thoughts of the visionary of the Jewish state and how Herzl's thinking can be applied to today's issues. We actually had a discussion here about some of those things on Herzl's birthday a few months ago. And before doing all this, Gal was an investment banker in New York and Europe, focusing on mergers and acquisitions. He's a native of Tel Aviv, and in a sort of counter-cultural trend, he moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So, Gal Kalev, thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Flo and Louis, for joining. I'm honored to be here back at the Begin Center for, I don't know, our 6th or so discussions about Judaism 3.0. In the previous sessions, we explored all sorts of angles about how this thesis plays out, the idea that Judaism is going through a historic transformation and Zionism is becoming its anchor. We talked about it about how does it play out the trends in Israel, about religiosity trends, about geopolitical trends. But I think today is a really important discussion because we're going to talk about the impact. What does it all mean if we recognize that Judaism is going through a transformation and Zionism is becoming the anchor of Judaism? And I want to thank everybody for coming. The reason that this is such an important conversation is because we live at a time that Judaism is under assault. And Judaism is under assault to the port of Zionism. It's not the first time, obviously, that Judaism is under a large-scale assault that happens every few centuries or so. But the port through which Judaism is being assaulted changes based on shifting global circumstances and Jewish circumstances. And as we discussed in previous sessions, in my view, Zionism is becoming the anchor and the most relevant aspect of Judaism, and therefore it's no surprise that the modern day assault on Judaism is happening through the port of Zionism. And before we delve into this conversation, I think it's important to use history to shed some misperceptions or mistakes that have been done in previous assaults on Judaism. So the first sort of natural, I'd say, mistake or natural lessons of history that we've seen in various rounds of assaults on Judaism is the notion that, in our case, if we get rid of Zionism, then the assault on Judaism will end. In other words, that, the idea that the problem is really with Zionism. And we've seen this in the last assault. I promise that I'm not going to over-Herzlize this conversation, but I use Herzl a lot. I think we can use his frameworks. And Herzl looked at that because a lot of people at this time, where there was a new form of hatred that we now call anti-Semitism, some Jews says, you know what, people have a problem with us as Jews, so it's really easy to solve this. We'll just convert out of Judaism. We'll disassociate ourselves from Judaism. And people start doing that and convert out of Judaism. And Herzl entertained the idea and studied this idea. And he concluded that the only thing that would happen if so many Jews convert out of Judaism is that the world will stop being a dirty Jew and it will be a dirty baptized or a dirty convert. You will not be able to convert out of Judaism. The problem, the assault on Judaism will continue even if you convert out of Judaism. We also seen that in a previous large-scale assault on Judaism that occurred about 300 years before Herzl, more, do the math, 400 years, during the time of the Inquisition. And that was also a similar set of circumstances because there was a lot of criticism on Jews and a lot of, there was a conflict. And Jews were given an option to convert. And supposedly if you convert out of Judaism and disconnect yourself from the Jewish religion, which was then the organizing principle of Judaism. I say now Zionism, Judaism 2.0 is the organizing principle of Judaism, but back then in 2000 years of diaspora, it was the religious nature and the insular nature of Judaism that was the organizing principle. So people in Spain said if we convert, then no more attacks on Judaism. And as we know, that didn't work. That only began because the Jews were then under the jurisdiction of the Inquisition, and the assault and the attempted eradication of Judaism occurred because they converted. So same thing here, and I think it's important for us to recognize that it's not if we if we end Israel, that's not going to end the assault on Judaism. Zionism is not the reason for the assault on Judaism. Zionism is the vehicle through which the assault on Judaism is being carried. And that is because Zionism is the most relevant aspect of Judaism. The second misperception that we've seen throughout history is that Jewish people might think that they'll be able to separate themselves from the bulk of the attack. So if we're in Europe in 1930s, you might say, oh no, I'm from the Upper East Side of Berlin, and I'm great. The Russian Jews that are coming in are immigrating. They're a real problem. You're right, they're beggars, or the Jews who are in the stock markets, behaving in antisocial ways, buying companies, speculating. Yeah, they're the problems, but we're in the Upper East Side of Vienna or wherever, we're fine. As we know, that didn't work. They were not able to separate themselves when the Nazis and their helpers came. Similar in other instances, maybe in Norwich, when the blood libels in England occurred, maybe some Jews tried to separate themselves, and in the end, all Jews were deported from England. So you cannot separate, I think, which we're seeing right now, this mistake being played out. There are Jewish people who, many of them are my friends, who think that they can separate themselves. It's a human nature, perhaps, by saying, no, the problem is not with us Jews here on this side of the ocean. The problem is with the Jews on the other side of the ocean. The problem is with the Jews in Israel. So the lessons of history that I think we need to, before even thinking about this discussion, is to conclude that we cannot separate, a Jew cannot separate himself from Judaism. And the third is that the attacks on Judaism in the past and the attack on Judaism today is affecting all Jews. It's related to the second point, but it's something a little bit different, because You know, you have today a reality, a sad reality, that Jewish people in New York and in other places in the United States are putting their own families and themselves in danger with the stroke of their pen or with their fingers on their keyboard. And I understand this idea that if you bash Israel and criticize Israel and be an anti-Zionist, and then, you know, psychologically you might be able to think that you will be safer. But there is no evidence whatsoever that any of the attacks against Jews, people check somebody's Facebook post or political affiliations. The attacks that we've seen in the United States and elsewhere against Jews that are driven by anti-Zionism, you know, was attacked against all Jews. Nobody can separate themselves out. Nobody can tell the assaulter that, oh, no, I'm actually an anti-Zionist, so don't attack me. So, you know, so with those things in mind, the understanding that you cannot convert out of this problem, the understanding that this, you cannot separate yourself, and the understanding that the attacks now through Zionism affects all Jews, I think we have to understand that in order to even begin the conversation. So, to begin the conversation, the question, Paul, that you presented in this program is anti-Zionism the new anti-Semitism? Well, the answer is yes, but it is much more lethal and dangerous than anti-Semitism. In the book, I draw parallels between anti-Zionism of today and the early stages of the anti-Semitism movement in the late 19th century and early 20th century. There's a lot of parallels, but we're in a much more dangerous place today than we were in Europe in the early 20th century. Anti-Semitism, traditional anti-Semitism today, is a threat. It's a threat to individual Jews, the safeties of Jews. So, you know, if people say Jews will not replace us, or 6 million were not enough, or Jews control Hollywood, that can translate into people taking actions and even murdering Jews, putting Jewish lives in danger. But anti-Semitism is not an existential threat to Judaism. Anti-Semitism in its traditional way is not an existential threat to Judaism. There is no destruction mechanism. There's ability to kill Jews, to inflict damage on Jews, but there is no ability like there were in previous eras, during the Inquisitions or during the Holocaust, to round up the Jews, to go into Hollywood, to go into New York, to go into all those places and round up the Jews and kill them. So anti-Semitism is a threat, a big threat to individual Jews, but not to the existence of Judaism. Anti-Zionism, on the other hand, is a much more serious threat to the safety of Jews, because statistics show that even now, between 60 and 80% of attacks on American Jews are done because of anti-Zionism and Israel bashing. So as already, anti-Zionism has become, if you will, the dominant variant of Jew hatred and the dominant cause of attacks against Jews in America, and I think also outside of America as well. And here too, rhetorics like, you know, the Jewish state kills Palestinian children, like we heard in the BBC just a few months ago. The Jewish state commits crimes against humanity, apartheid. Jewish states arranges for militia to storm Al-Aqsa Mosque. All of those inciting modern-day blood libels lead to Jews being less safe, much more than traditional anti-Semitism attack like 6 million were not enough. That's just the statistics. But the most important thing is that unlike traditional anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is a danger to the existence, to survival of Judaism, because anti-Zionism has destruction mechanism. As we speak here today, there is an ongoing investigation in the International Criminal Court against, not really clear, all Israelis, you know, generals, settlers, maybe all of you, because you're in Jerusalem right now, that many European countries view as occupied territory, by the way, not occupied by the Palestinians, but occupied by the Europeans, meaning they view it as an international territory. But is being here a war crime or no? Maybe being in the settlement in the West Bank is a war crime. We don't know. Maybe being a soldier, we don't know. There is an investigation, but that's just one example. There are mechanisms. You know, we've seen Israeli generals, one who's I spoke to recently one of the most altruistic people I know, who couldn't get off a plane years ago when he came to Europe because there was a threat that he might get arrested. If we are going to be in a reality where Israelis cannot travel because you serve in the army, or because you live in Jerusalem, or because you consume settlements from the product, which is just about 100% of Israelis products from the settlements, then we will be paralyzed. And we also had a little bit of a proof of concept of what's happening right now with the Ukrainian-Russian war. The world got together and effectively blocked finances of many Russians. Can the world, if the anti-Zionist dogmatic philosophy gets entrenched a little bit more, can there be a buy-in around the world that we should maybe freeze assets of Zionist, Israeli high-tech billionaires and entrepreneurs, or all of us? So we can go on and on about what are the path to destruction or the path to the eradication of Judaism through anti-Zionism. But the point is that traditional anti-Semitism does not have this path towards the destruction of Judaism. Anti-Zionism does. And we have a movie now playing out in theaters outside Golda about the Yom Kippur War. And one of the lessons we've learned in the Yom Kippur War that I think is being carried out nicely in this film is that we don't just study intentions, we study capabilities. So it's completely correct that most people outside of Israel, Europeans and others, even those that are harsh critics, and criticism of Israel must be protected even if you don't agree about it, most of them don't want to eradicate Judaism, but don't want to eradicate Judaism through Zionism. But the mechanisms are there. So the lessons from the Yom Kippur War, the capabilities are there, and the capabilities is happening through anti-Zionism and not through traditional anti-Semitism. So, in the previous transformation of Judaism, when Judaism transformed from being about the physical presence in Judea and the temple into, which I call Judaism 1.0, into those 2,000 years of Judaism 2.0 in the diaspora, somebody might have said back then, you know what, I love Jews. I love the Jews who worship in the temple that used to exist centuries ago. I love Jews who used to be in Judea, but they're not there anymore. But I hate those Jews now that go to synagogue and pray 3 times a day and wear kippah and celebrate Rosh Hashanah. Those are the Jews I hate. Once there was a recognition that Judaism transformed in Judaism 2.0, you could not hide behind that premise. And the same thing I think is happening right now. There's a lot of people who are saying, well, I love the Jews, but I hate the Zionists. So what can we do about it? How can we counter this threat to Judaism that is occurring through Zionism? Well, until now, the solution was what we call in Hebrew asbara, Israeli public diplomacy. That was the solution. We'll send our best presenters, Michael Owen, Fleur, who's a great defender of Israel, Bibi, Ron Dermer, Naftali Bennett. We'll send them to the BBC and to CNN, and they'll defend Israel. Herzl had something to say about that too. Herzl also studied at that time that Hasbara was done to what was called committees against anti-Semitism. And he mocked them. They thought they were completely futile because dogmatic minds cannot be changed. And we live in an environment where there's a lot of polarization and dogmatic minds. So take the example of what I mentioned earlier, BBC, a credible BBC presenter saying that the Israeli army not only kills Palestinian children, but is happy to kill Palestinian children. So no problem, we'll send Asbara, we'll put Naftali Bennett, like him, don't like him. He's, I think we all can agree, one of the best orators and speakers that we have. And he debated her. How many people, I don't know if you would do a survey afterwards, how many people believed Bennett, a settler, the leaders of the settlers a few decades ago, former Israeli prime minister, wears a kippah. How many would believe him, or how many would believe this credible BBC presenter? So, Hasbara, today is in an environment where anti-Zionism is so entrenched into the global psyche, is ineffective. Some of my friends, it's hard for me to convince my own friends that, for example, that Israel does not have a list of journalists it wants to assassinate. People say, great, now you're like making a peace with Saudi Arabia, you're like a match made in heaven. So people people, I can't, there's nothing I can convince my own friends. So anti-Zionism is too entrenched, and therefore Asvara is of limited effectiveness. So some people, especially in briefings I have with ambassadors of foreign officials or diplomats, they say, okay, we get it. We understand that Zionism, anti-Zionism is a threat, as you claim, that it's dogmatic, that it's entrenched in society. But don't worry, the populace is anti-Zionist, but the governments will never let things like this happen. We'll never freeze assets of Israelis. We'll never arrest en masse Israeli generals or soldiers. We will protect Israel. You have nothing to worry about. And here again, Herzl studied that particular point. Because a lot of people at his time said, you are an alarmist about anti-Semitism. And this is merely 40 years or so, before the Holocaust. You're alarmist about anti-Semitism because, the emperor loves us, the government loves us. And even if they don't love us, nobody will give hand to the murder of Jews or anything like that. And Herzl refuted that. And he agreed. He knew that the emperor, the Austrian and Hungarian emperor, the German emperor, they wouldn't, they were overall, acceptably friendly to the Jews. But he said that, even then in dictatorships, they're subject to the will of the people. They will not be able to defend Jews once the populace demands that. And he in particular saw that in the populist movements, demonstrations, protests that occurred around the election of an anti-Semitic mayor of Vienna. To the politicians in the room, we see now there's demonstrations and protests, and I think you would agree, whether on the left or on the right, public sentiment and populism affects decisions. So just like we cannot hide or be reassured that don't worry about anti-Zionism as a threat to Jews and to Judaism because we have Asvara, an Israeli public diplomacy, we should not be take comfort in the fact that governments will protect us. And I just want to make clear that those governments and individual people I know in those governments, even ones who are harsh critics of Israel, will defend Israel, they support Israel, they're allies. But they're only, especially in democracies, subjected to what the people want, and anti-Zionism is too entrenched now across the gamut of Western society, in Europe, in the United States, and elsewhere. So all this was kind of bad news and a damper after our Rosh Hashanah toast. But here is some really good news. We have an asset in this round of assault against Judaism. We have an asset that we didn't have in all previous rounds where Judaism was being attacked. And that is that it is no longer popular to be an anti-Semite. It's no longer popular to say, I hate Jews. That didn't exist even 100 years ago. So Herzl had friends who were anti-Semites. He said he developed liberal attitudes who were anti-Semites. And he engaged with them, he spoke with them, he disagreed with them, but that was a legitimate view to say, I'm so-and-so, I'm an anti-Semite. Today you cannot say, I'm so-and-so and I'm an anti-Semite. But you can certainly say, I'm so-and-so and I'm an anti-Zionist. Once you create this notion that I'm describing in the book and that we've been having this conversation, once you create a global consciousness that Judaism is transformed and Zionism is the anchor of Judaism, you can no longer say, I love the Jews, but I hate the Zionists. You can no longer say, I'm so-and-so, and I'm an anti-Semite, but just like you cannot say, I believe that Jews are killing children, you won't be able to say, once you accept this, this is the Jews in Israel are killing children. Once we create that equation, we alter the ability, we alter the attack, basically, against Judaism that is occurring through Zionism. The Israel basher, the anti-Zionist, has to stay in Judaism 2.0 in order to succeed. He needs to have as a starting point the premise that Judaism is really a religion, and therefore, hey, I'm not attacking the Jewish religion, I'm attacking the Jewish nation, or Zionism. So again, once we have this recognition that Judaism is transformed, then we rob that starting point from the Israel basher we curtail the little part of anti-Zionism. So, in other words, the way I like to describe it is that anti-Zionism, the little anti-Zionist attacks, are done with a sword and a shield. The sword of Israel bashing and anti-Zionism is dependent on the shield. The shield is Judaism 2.0. The notion that Judaism is merely a religion. Once there is a global recognition that Judaism is shifting and that Zionism is becoming its anchor, we basically decimate or at least curtail, damage this shield, and therefore there'll be less assault. So to take the example again of BBC, or the BBC situation, the presenter, and I don't know, and other presenters, because it's not just using that as an example, it's socially acceptable for her to say that Israeli Jews basically are killing Palestinian children, because that is the socially acceptable ways. If there is a recognition that we're in Judaism 3.0, she'll be stopped in two ways. One is that, if she'll say so, she'll get fired, just like if she'll say today that Jews kill children, as used to say the predecessors of BBC, disseminated information centuries ago. But she wouldn't say it probably, because I'm sure that she and other presenters are nice people and are normative people, and it will be a taboo, socially unacceptable to say so once there's this recognition that we're in Judaism 3.0. And the good news is that that recognition, as I'm describing in the book, is happening. There is a gradual and a slow shift of consciousness of what is Judaism. I describe in the book how people relate to Jews more and more through Zionism in Israel, in the positive or in the negative. And as we're having those discussions here, what we basically are doing is diagnosing it, is recognizing it, is outing that message. And thanks to the discussions we had here, discussions in the think tank that Paul mentioned, people who are reading the book, engaging with it, and all that kind of other ways, briefings, it's a slow process, a process that will take decades, a process that Theodor Herzl started 130 years ago, almost, where he planted the seeds for the transformation of Judaism. So he knew back then, he said that, even it might take 50 years just for his ideas not to be ridiculed, which is another way of looking at what he said that in Basel I established a Jewish state. It takes decades for transformation of this magnitude to start, but you're all here can be ambassadors of this message because a recognition, at least in my view, that we're in Judaism 3.0 and that Zionism is the anchor of Judaism goes a long way at defending Jews, defending Judaism, and defending humanity. I look forward to having our conversations. Thank you.
Invite our speakers onto the stage. Thank you very much, Gal. So what I think we'll do, first of all, is to I will introduce our two guests. I have here Uri Zaki, since 2021 the chair of the Herzl Center of the WZO of Mount Herzl, with oversight of the Herzl Museum and the Herzl Education Center. His long career has been a combination of Zionist work and the promotion of peace, democracy, and human rights as one of Israel's leading liberal voices. He has been an advisor to the Minister of Justice, an active member of the negotiating team of the Geneva Accord, and its first spokesperson, founding director of B'Tselem USA, member of the Association of Civil Rights in Israel's Executive Board, director of Zionist Enterprises at the World Zionist Organization, and founder of the Front for the Protection of Democracy. As Gal said outside, he's one of the leading figures of the Meretz Party, currently serving as the chairperson of its executive board. Thank you for joining us. And we also have with us, not for the first time, it's always a pleasure to see Fleur Hassan Nafou, Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem in charge of foreign relations, international economic development and tourism. She's a co-founder of the UAE Israel Business Council, an association of Emirati and Israeli business and government leaders fostering bilateral trade, innovation and cooperation. She was, like myself, born in London. Unlike me, she grew up in Gibraltar, and she immigrated to Israel in 2001. Thank you, Fleur. Okay, so let's welcome our guests. Let's start, ladies first, Fleur, if that's okay, Uri. I'd be interested in your take on the wider question that we're discussing, and if you can also reflect a little on Gal's thesis as well.
So first of all, thank you for inviting me. I know I'm one of the kind of kavut here, and I love being at the Begin Center. Of course, Begin is somebody that I hugely admire, one of the reasons why I'm a member and a Central Committee member of the Likud Party. I want to quote one of the people that I look up to, probably up there with Begin, and that is Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And he talks about Judaism as a mutating, anti-Semitism as a mutating virus. And so he talks about the fact that in the Middle Ages, anti-Semitism was all about religion. Jews as the Christ killers. And my family, who come originally from Spain, and went through and ran away from Spain during the Inquisition, and went to Menorca, which is next to Mallorca and Ibiza, because at the time it was British, and then ended up in Morocco and Gibraltar. And they were persecuted because Judaism was seen in those days as a religion, and Jews were seen as Christ killers. 120 years ago, 100 years ago, the Nazis rose to power because Judaism was seen as an ethnicity, a dirty ethnicity, that we weren't worthy of the Aryan race and Europeans, and we were bringing everybody down. And then Judaism, or the Jewish people, anti-Semitism was all about race. So we went from religion and went to race, and today we're talking about the new anti-Semitism. I completely agree with Gal. The new anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism. It's the Jew as the collective, the Jew as the nation state, and that's why they hate us. So this mutating virus today has the expression of anti-Zionism, and I completely agree. And I think if we're going to see any proof of that, is this. Why are Jews attacked in the diaspora when something happens in Israel if anti-Semitism is not anti-Zionism? I can't understand anybody who doesn't see the truth right in front of them. Does any other country in the world get as much attention as Israel does as a violator of human rights? Come on. I mean, just look around. Syria, 500,000 people were killed. There's a huge crisis in Europe of immigrants from Syria. And there's what, one UN resolution against Syria? How many resolutions against Israel a year? 25? So it's very clear that the mutating virus that Rabbi Dr. Lord Jonathan Sachs talks about is alive and kicking, and the beauty of where we are today is that we have a country, we have an army, we have self-determination, we have autonomy, and we're strong, and nobody can push us around.
Thank you very much, Fleur. Uri, would you share your thoughts with us on the topic?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Thanks, Gal, for inviting me. It's a pleasure meeting you and sharing the stage with you. And of course, a great honor to be here at the Begin Center. As I said before to those who heard, I grew up in a family that admired Begin, and I myself, like many things in my family, I came from like somewhat Masorti family, and I became more Masorti, like I'm praying every morning and stuff like that. Same with the Cherut and Begin. I started out becoming a huge fan of Begin, and I can attribute to my admiration to Begin. I don't know if his current official successors would like it, my involvement in politics. But I believe that I didn't change my values, I changed my party, and I do believe that at least in many of the values I promote, they originated from the lessons and the vision I took from Begin. Maybe in a different panel we can discuss that too. I must say that I won't be as supportive of all the arguments you made, Gal, which you so eloquently made. And I guess probably one of the reasons you invited me, because it will be boring, right? If we all agree, then you'll be bored and we can all go home. But many of the, it's not like I totally disagree with you. I think you have a nucleus of strong arguments there, but there are some things that I think you are, how would I say it, taking it and making it into the only reality that there is, and I'm not sure I share your thesis. By the way, I'm not even sure I share your thesis that Zionism is the only new Judaism. By the way, even at the time of the Second Temple, there was the center in Judea, which was flourishing at certain points, but there were big centers outside of Judea, whether it's Babylon or Alexandria, which were flourishing too. And perhaps the reason there is still Judaism is because of those centers. So I'm not sure, at least from the Second Temple onwards, I'm not sure we ever had one Judaism. And that's the time, about the time that Judaism really became Judaism. And of course, even today, when you have two big Jewish centers in the world, I do think that there are two big, how would I call it, kinds of Judaism. And within them, there are many other elements. Of course, they influence each other, and perhaps the Zionist vision and the fact that not Zionism per se, but the fact that you have a Jewish state affects more the American community and Jews around the world, but I mostly relate to the North American community when I talk about the other center, naturally. So maybe our starting point is different. But I'll tell you where I think, at least in this panel discussion where we discuss anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism as a new anti-Semitism, why I feared some of the messages you put forth, and I'll tell you why. First of all, the good old anti-Semitism is very much present. At the end of the day, Pittsburgh, for instance, didn't have anything to do, or Charlottesville didn't have anything to do with Zionism or the State of Israel. These are good old anti-Semites, are affiliated with the radical right, if you can call it even right, those neo-Nazi groups. Same goes to Europe. You know, neo-Nazism still flourishes and it's still around, and it's still related to populism, nationalism, and to xenophobia. Now, it's even more dangerous because some of, unlike what you said, in a way, I'm okay with the Jews, but I'm against Zionism. You have, what fears more, the way I see it, is many of those neo-Nazi, and now they call themselves, we're not neo-Nazi, but we are, I don't know, nationalist, whatever, groups whether it is in the United States, but especially in Europe, who are anti-Semites, are for Israel. Just a week ago, there was a meeting in Romania of the Israeli ambassador with a leader of a group that is anti-Semite, a party, anti-Semite. But because many of those anti-Semites are also Islamophobic, and they see the greatest threat to the European Christian culture from Arab and Muslim immigrants, they see, oh, Israel knows how to deal with these folks. Those weak Jews that we have, they're part of the problem. Israel's the solution. And besides, Israel is there, they're here. So many times you see all these anti-Semites all of a sudden hugging Israel and saying, oh, Israel is good, but the Jews are bad. So it's not like you put it in such a clear cut and another thing that made me unease in my seat, which, and excuse me for the end of that in Israeli, I'll be a bit blunt. I think part of your opening, your intro was somewhat condescending towards Jews who are criticizing Israel, saying they're trying, the reason they're criticizing Israel is because they want to disassociate themselves in order not to be hated. Listen, I'm in strong disagreement with many of my fellow, whether they're Jews or not Jews, who criticize the Zionist enterprise. I believe the Zionist enterprise is a miracle. I admire Herzl, a man-made miracle. The fact that we are here is amazing, and I think it's a huge contribution to humanity. It's not like we're immune from mistakes, and we're making many mistakes every day, as a nation, as a government, so on and so forth. But we are not the Ten Commandments. We are not the Torah. We are not holy. And it's okay to criticize Israel, especially if you're Jewish. Especially if you're Jewish, because you feel part of the mishpucha. And you say, my crazy brother is doing crazy stuff, which I don't agree with. I want it to be heard. And to say, no, they're not doing it because they're criticizing, because they're passionate about Israel. Maybe, many times when you're angry, excuse me, with your wife, right? Or with your spouse, okay? You are most vicious because it's someone you love. And I think a lot of that criticism doesn't come from if I'll try to psychologically analyze it, necessarily from disassociating myself because I don't want to be hated by my fellow non-Jews, but rather because I'm passionate about it, because they're doing something perhaps in my name. Not because I'm afraid of the reaction of my surrounding, but rather of them being Jews and myself being a Jew. So if I'll conclude this part, I will say two things. First, it's okay, even if you disagree with the criticism, it's okay to criticize Israel. That doesn't mean that I disagree with you that there are, maybe I should say it, many of those who hate Israel, it's a new kind of anti-Semitism. I agree with that. It's not across the board that anybody that criticizes Israel is an anti-Semite. Unfortunately, Israel does, as a nation and its governments, does things that are worthwhile criticizing. I myself criticize my country many times. But it is true that some of it is just a mask in order to have a new kind of, especially for people who can't afford being rednecks or stuff like that. I agree with that, but it doesn't mean that all of it is anti-Semitism, not at all. And second, the old style anti-Semitism is still there, and it's very dangerous. And we should not say, oh, don't worry about that, it's gone, it's not there anymore. We have new kind of anti-Semitism that's anti-Zionism. Plus, don't say, everybody that criticizes us is against us. It's not the story.
Okay. I think I wanted to respond briefly. Take the mic.
If I can respond and clarify, and then I want to, if I'm allowed to also ask you both a question. Look, actually, we agree more than we disagree. Absolutely. We can all go home now. No, but I do want to say two things that to clarify two things that absolutely criticism of Israel, as I stated in the book and in previous discussions we have here, is a way to connect to your Jewish identity, through Israel in the negative. So you have I have a lot of American friends who don't practice religion and don't think of the Holocaust and don't eat gefilte fish. They only come into their Judaism when they read an article in the New York Times and write a Facebook post as a Jew embarrassed about Israel. That is also a connection to Israel, and that is, I might not agree with it, but it's legitimate. Criticism of Israel must be protected. And in fact, even in the early stages of the think tank, the Judaism 3.0 think tank that used to be the America-Israel Friendship League think tank, the person that sort of was very involved in that idea of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is somebody who's harshly critical of Israel, a pro-Palestinian friend of mine, not Jewish, that wanted to be protected. She's, that says, okay, there is anti-Zionism and Israel bashing, that's, not allowed, that's a form of anti-Semitism, and then there's legitimate criticism. What I did not say that people only write articles against Israel, as a way to reduce their personal safety. I was trying to be generous with those thinkers and journalists that do so. And I understand this human kind of psychology, but what I was saying, and I'll have to get you the two of your reaction, is that, when you do that, given statistically that 60 to 80%, according to the statistics that we're familiar with, of attacks against Jews are driven by anti-Zionism, and other 20 or 40% are by good old anti-Semitism, as you called it. But given that the majority are driven by anti-Israel and anti-Zionism, then by virtue of writing some, not criticism, but like some harsh Israel-bashing, articles that incite people against it, you're putting your own life in danger. So that's what I said. But the question I have actually for both of you, anti-Semitism is a lot of what traditional good old anti-Semitism, the old mutation, Fleur, to use, your reference to Rabbi Sachs' terminology, is alive and well. But what I argue is that not just that anti-Zionism is a more dangerous form currently to the safety of Jews, but it has the destruction mechanism to eradicate Judaism, while traditional anti-Semitism does not. So I want to ask both of you as policymakers, and if you say it this way, is anti-Zionism a threat to the survival of Judaism, while traditional good old anti-Semitism in the 2020s is really, anti-Semitism is the threat of the previous, of the 20th century. So that's why I never understood those people who says that zero tolerance to the threat of last century, but I'm going to participate in Israel bashing, which is a threat in our current times.
Well, first of all, we have a promise from God that we're never going to be destroyed. And if we've made it this far, I think we're pretty good. And the fact that we have a state of Israel that we've revived after 2,000 years, and we've become a superpower in the region, where all the Arab countries that wanted to destroy us today are looking to make peace with us, I think we should all feel calm that the Jewish people are going to survive. Okay, so let's put that aside. What I worry about, actually, is what happens in college campuses, which is really a canary in the mine to exactly what you're talking about. And the dangerous thing, and where we referenced anti-Semitism from the right, and I think it's disgusting that any Israelis should be pandering to the European right-wing fascists just because they're anti-Muslim. I'm with you on that. Believe me, I was raised in Europe, I studied in London, and I'm with you. But what, unfortunately, people in your party don't talk about is the very harsh threat of the left-wing academic anti-Semitism wrapped in an anti-Zionist package. And that is really a very dangerous thing, not for non-Jews, but for Jews. For me, the thing that hurts me the most is not when 18-year-old non-Jewish kids go to college and hate Jews, because then in their late 20s and their 30s, they meet a few Jews, they work with a few Jews, they actually realize we're not so bad. My real worry is losing our own kids. Is when Jews, nice kids, 18, 19 years old, go to university and they're so confused because they were raised in a traditional Zionist home, whether secular or religious, it doesn't matter. And when they get to college, they're given a choice. You're either pro-human rights or you're pro-Israel. You can't be both. Make a choice. And so you have three types of students. The ones who hide, and they're like, you know what, just leave me alone, I don't want to be affiliated. The ones who become anti their own people, and they're like, become the biggest proponents of BDS in America are Jews, and unfortunately, Israelis. That's just the fact, okay? These are the statistics. Or the ones that then become militant, and they become real pro-Israel, and they're fighting against the grain in a university campus. That's what I'm worried about, because this is what shapes these kids for the rest of their lives. And I want to say one more thing, which we haven't mentioned, and I think it's very important to say. Unfortunately, in America, I'm talking about America as the kind of liberal beacon. You can apply some of the same principles to Europe. But unfortunately, in America, what happens is that there's a lot of layers to this problem. And this crazy, woke, white guilt has been imposed in Jewish Ashkenaz normality into the college campus. In other words, the 80% of American Jews, 85% are Ashkenazi, so they automatically buy in to the narrative of the white colonialist European Jews coming to the Middle East and dispossessing the Palestinian indigenous people. No. I mean, that is the narrative. The narrative, of course, is completely wrong. I'm very proud to say that I did a DNA test very recently, and although I'm majority Spanish-Moroccan, I've actually got quite a chunk of Middle Eastern DNA in me, and I'm very proud to be 5% Ashkenazi. But essentially, we in Israel have bought in to the narrative of the Europe. We're here because of the Holocaust. And I can tell you, as somebody representing the city in foreign affairs, when we bring a foreign leader to this country, where do we take them? Two places, Yad Vashem and Har Herzl. In Kol HaKavod, I love Har Herzl, I was there last week. What does that tell people? What is the message we're putting out? We're not indigenous. We weren't here for 3,000 years. King David didn't build a city. No, no, no. We're here because of the Holocaust. And that unfortunate narrative, which is part of our narrative, but it's not the whole picture, has been transposed to this American white guilt of the majority Ashkenazi American Jews, and this is what American Jews are putting on themselves. And that is something, if you ask me, that with education of our history here, with education of the Jews of the Middle East, with the education that we should be talking about, should be combating these layers that go into this self-hatred, that go into the students who go and get completely brainwashed by a very anti-Semitic, wrapped into anti-Zionist academia in America and the rest of the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a quick question. Apart from Fleur and myself, is there anyone here from the UK? Oh wow, fantastic. Okay, so I wanted to say a few words which relate to what we've talked about, of course, and I'll also it will lead on to some questions as well for our guests. But I mentioned in my opening remarks that this topic is something that I've been involved in certain ways in recent years, and in particular the last few years ago, I was writing a fair bit about what was going on in Britain with Jeremy Corbyn. I assume that even those of you not from the UK are familiar with Corbyn, the Labour Party candidate for Prime Minister, who was, well, let's get to this. Certainly an anti-Zionist. In my view, also absolutely an anti-Semite, but others don't agree with that. We can talk about that. But essentially, a few things that came out of that whole story. One was that here you had a kind of test case, right, where you had an anti-Zionist, someone with a career-long history of anti-Zionism, who took over, became the leader of a political party that was formerly very moderate, not full of people that may have had some criticisms of Israel, but certainly not an anti-Israel party, certainly not an anti-Semitic party. And the question was, what would happen to that party once it was under the leadership of this anti-Zionist and his also anti-Zionist acolytes? And the result was an absolute epidemic of anti-Semitism in the party. Anti-Semitism. And so Israel did come into it, but what was much more common was not so much criticism of Israel, but members of the party, local municipal leaders, and even some members of parliament whose social media feeds were full of interesting theories about Rothschilds, right? Or even flirting with Holocaust denial and other things. So you had out-and-out anti-Semitism that flourished in this anti-Zionist environment. So one of the conclusions I reached was that whether or not anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and we can have our own views about that, and our speakers have made some compelling cases, whether or not it is, I think it's absolutely a, should we say, a sort of gateway drug to anti-Semitism, right? That it opens the door to anti-Semitism. So it might be the case that not everyone who's an anti-Zionist, who has, for their own, I think, mistaken beliefs, sees Zionism as some sort of evil colonialist ideology, they themselves might not see themselves, in fact many don't see themselves, as anti-Semitic, and may think, you know, I have no problem with Jews as Jews, whatever. But what you will find is that in the chat rooms and forums and sort of online space that they inhabit, you will also find blood libel and Holocaust denial and conspiracy theories about Jewish control of the media and all the old anti-Semitic tropes, right? So anti-Zionism sort of it goes hand in glove with anti-Semitism, whether anti-Zionists like it or not. And so someone like Corbyn would say to his blue in the face that he's this lifelong anti-racist and doesn't have a racist bone in his body, etc., etc. Although oddly, he did seem to share a lot of platforms with out-and-out anti-Semites and murderers of Jews, terrorists and others. So that's a whole other story. But it's interesting. It's an interesting. I think it was an interesting test case. Now, one of the things that has been mentioned by everyone, Uri brought it up first, was this question of criticism of Israel, and Gal, you responded that you didn't think that you supported the notion that there should be criticism of Israel, legitimate criticism of Israel. The question is, and maybe I'll put it to you first, Uri, I think you brought it up first, is one of the things that was prominent in the British case, but I think is also in other cases as well, is that anti-Zionism is perceived by some to be criticism of Israel, right? So people would. Can you repeat that? Yeah, that anti-Zionism is perceived to be simply criticism of Israel. So someone like Jeremy Corbyn or someone like that would make what to all of us on this stage would be a blatantly anti-Zionist comment. That Zionism is a racist ideology, that Israel is, that the creation of the state of Israel was illegitimate in some way. And the defense of it would be, I'm just criticizing Israel. How can that be anti-Semitic?
I think, first of all, anti-Zionism, meaning saying that Jews do not have the right of self-determination, is anti-Semitism. If you think that any other, including the Palestinians, by the way, I believe the Palestinians have the right of self-determination. There are people, they define themselves as people, that's the Herzl vision. But if you say one particular people doesn't have the right because who knows what the reasons are, of course it's a form of anti-Semitism, that's for sure. But the problem with us sometimes, when I say us is a very broad circle of people, is that any criticism of Israel is either interpreted as anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism. Even harsh criticism of Israel is not necessarily anti-Zionism. And so it's true that those who say Jews don't have the right to self-determination, I don't know whether it's a religion or whatever, are anti-Semites because they make a particular case out of Jews and differ them from any other peoples. But we also make a mistake by saying anyone that criticizes us is anti-Zionist. I want to refer to 2 points you made. First of all, I agree with her. The Jewish people is strong, and we survive many things. The state of Israel is also very strong, but the historical lesson is that all of the times we achieved sovereignty, it ended eventually by an external force, but mostly because of self-inflicted destruction, and that
it's where we called in an external force to interfere.
I said before we were worried about external forces, we should worry about ourselves and what we might bring here by our own acts and deeds. Just a small reaction to what you said about Asbara. You mentioned only right-wingers. One of them, my wife served under his government, but he still was a right-winger. And maybe that's the problem. When I was in the United States, J Street really was alarmed by what you talked about in campuses. And they formed what is called, I'm talking about 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, okay? I don't know what's happening now. About a decade ago. And, there were those Israel apartheid weeks in college campuses, and they would invite to meet J Street in order to oppose those events, to bring someone who's an Israeli patriot, a Zionist, but says, not everything that Israel does is okay, and occupation is something that, and human rights should be respected, and so on and so forth. Like saying, it's a complex, it's not like you have to hate Israel in order to defend the rights of Palestinians. Israel can do wrong. And if I take it now, a decade later, I believe that whenever you hear someone like Benvir saying, my right of free movement is more important than those of the Palestinians who live in Samaria. Excuse me?
You have the opposite. He said his right to life is more important than the other.
His right to life, whatever, yes.
More important than their right to movement.
Yes. Go and explain that, and when he says that, and when Smotrich is doing whatever, and how this government is perceived in the outside world. And on the other hand, you see the demonstrators, and I know most of the people here don't support the protest. I don't know it. I assume. You do support? Great!
It's a diverse. We're not going to.
I'm happy we're in a diverse.
It's a diverse
audience.
He thinks all Anglos are right wing.
No, not at all. Not at all. statistically speaking, in Jerusalem, but you know what? I do believe it, if I'll open it, I do believe that the begging voters of the Likud are not in line with this Likud government at all. So I'm not surprised, but thank you for clarifying it, and I'm happy that they're supportive of that. But if I'll go back to Hasbara, I believe that right now, the greatest Hasbara you have for the state of Israel is this huge protest for democracy. And all of a sudden, after years, liberals around the world, by the way, liberal Jews too, but not only, have something to identify with in Israel. So I think it does a huge service to the state of Israel and to Zionism.
Okay. I think I want to get to questions from the audience, but Gal, did you want to respond quickly?
Very quickly, three things. First, I'm very proud that in all of our Judaism 3.0 events, we have a very diverse audience, and we have people supporting the book, from the right and the left. So that's not political. That's great. To answer your question, Paul, about anti-Semitism, we could have had the same discussion 100 years ago. But the question is, anti-Semitism, a form of Jew hatred, and where do you draw the line between legitimate criticism of Jews and hatred? Because Jews were, again, they were, taking over the media quickly at the end of the 19th century. Meaning, at the beginning of the 19th century, Jews were not allowed to work as lawyers, and they not own newspapers, and they not own banks, and all of a sudden they do. Is that a legitimate criticism? Many Jews bought coal mines, reduced the safety standards. Children died. Can you say Jews are happy to kill children? Maybe not, but so again, we can have the same conversation we're having now, 100 years ago. Where do you draw the line between anti-Semitism?
Very critical on both coal mine owners and
exactly. Herzl was called an honorary anti-Semite. So this conversation, can be taking place back then. So I'm arguing that Judaism is transforming, and now Zionism is its anchor, and therefore the vehicle of its opposition. And then we talked about having one of the next sessions about where exactly do you draw the line. And so the one thing I disagree, since we said that we're agreeing too much, I'll disagree with both of you about such a nuance about the threats to Israel. Yes, we are. I used to hear those, when I lived in New York, it was part of the talking points of Israelis diplomats that, it's a David versus Goliath, and I'd rather be, now Israel is strong, so they don't like us, I'd rather be Goliath and be alive and be David and be dead, but the biblical story ended up differently. David, Goliath died. So I think that we are underestimating tremendously the threat of Israel bashing and anti-Zionism. I think there is an underestimation about how entrenched this is in society. I have endless friends. A friend that over a decade ago explained to me that Israeli soldiers. This is somebody who's very sophisticated, a French, a fellow investment banker, explained to me that Israeli soldiers go into, and settlers go into Palestinian refugees camp and rape Palestinian women on a daily basis. And I explained to her that, and I'm a soldier, and it's not, that doesn't happen. And she said, they're hiding it from you.
I heard something else. There was some woman who did a report, I think for the European Union, that said that we're racist because we don't rape Palestinian women.
So fine.
You can't win. You just can't win.
So you can't win, but this is exactly for that report and that notion. Like, I agree to disagree with my friend, and then she said, okay, well, Amnesty now says something similar. It's entrenched and it's so strong that it is a strategic threat that should be dealt in the same way that the threats from Iran and elsewhere is threat.
I'm not saying that this is not a strategic threat. I'm not saying that at all. I think it is a strategic threat, and my sadness is that I don't think Israel, any government, not right, not left, have ever taken this seriously enough. And I think that with the generations, and I know because I didn't grow up here, you guys did, that Israelis are becoming increasingly more provincial, which means they're looking more inwards and less outwards. And this, to me, as somebody who grew up in southern Spain and moved to the UK, and I studied in the UK, and my whole life is about foreign affairs, is a big sadness to me. I don't think we take it seriously enough. I agree with you. Whether I think that could destroy the state of Israel with the beautiful things going on between Israel and the Arab world, I'm not sure.
Well, we start arresting people, we started freezing assets. There's a lot of, like, far-fetched, things that we thought, in 1920s, if we would have this debate, the idea that you'll run out Jews and kill them seems far-fetched. I'm not saying this is happening tomorrow, but I'm saying that given that it exists, in such a profound way that it's part of the psychic part of the consciousness of people, that, this is something that's very alarming, and that's why I'm proposing that, if we have a shift of consciousness of what Judaism is, people will be deterred from exercising and attacking, because that exists in other fields. For example, you mentioned Uri, the campuses and liberals around the world now having something to connect with in Israel, and I completely agree with you. I think there's what's happening in Israel now. I'm not as alarmed by the rift and things like that. I think there's a lot of good things around it, but in those liberal circles, the way you look at gay people, for example, has completely changed over the last few decades in all circles. There are certain terminologies, there are certain ways, the way you look at women, the way you look at people of color. There's language, like things that you were able to say a decade ago, you were not going to say now. So I'm saying we can do the same thing with Judaism and Zionism. Just like a decade or 2 decades ago, you were able to say certain things about people of color and get away with it. And it's not a racist, it's just that so-and-so. Just like a decade or 2 ago, you were able to say things about gay people, and so I'm not homophobic, but the conversation changed completely. And I believe that given that, in my view, there's a gradual shift of consciousness of what Judaism is, and Zionism is the anchor of Judaism, we can have a similar shift of consciousness when it comes to anti-Zionist rhetoric.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's going the other way, actually. I think it's going the other way. I think anti-Semitism is actually socially acceptable everywhere.
Okay.
Anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism.
Right,
in America, you can't say anything about anybody, but you can still talk about the Jews badly.
But like moving over and something that you say something.
Okay, all right. I want to. Uri also has something that has something to say. It's funny, about anti-Semitism. One of the things that we always say, of course, is that Jews can get away with saying things about Jews and non-Jews can't. Like Jewish comedians can make jokes. So if I were to say to you that 3 Jews on the stage and they just want to talk, I think that's one of those comments that maybe only a Jew can make. So Uri,
no, it's fine. Let's hear from the audience, and I'll find a way to say what I said.
Fair enough.
What I wanted to say.
I'm going to ask one of my colleagues, Paz. Actually, fill out the rest of it. Okay, so we're gonna take one of these. We don't have a spare mic, so okay, one of my colleagues is going to take one of these microphones so that we can use those mics so that we can hear questions. Who has a question? Who would? Okay, that's something. Okay, very quick with his hand up there. Gentleman there with the white shirt. Over here.
Firstly, thank you very much. My question is, I'm going to share what I heard from Rabbi Doron Perez on Sunday night when he was speaking about his book, in which he posted on the Gaon as saying there's 3 types of anti-Semitism, and this was alluded to a little bit earlier. One is the opposition to Judaism as a religion. This is historically Christian, perhaps Islamic anti-Semitism. The second is opposition to Jews as a people. This was the genocidal Haman Nazi anti-Semitism. And the third is opposition to Jewish sovereignty. And I like that term sovereignty rather than Zionism because the prototype was the wars of the Philistines against King David's kingdom and against King Solomon's kingdom. So I wonder if you can at all include that in the paradigm as you talk about anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism based on Judaism 3.0. Thank you.
before Doron Perez, Rabbi Sachs said the same thing, no?
But I think you're saying something that's absolutely correct. There is if I understand correctly, an issue specifically about sovereignty. Like I'm saying, I'm using Zionism as the national expression of the Jewish nation religion, and arguing there's opposition to there. But you're asking to pinpoint, right, more about sovereignty. And yeah, the idea. Look, I mean. The idea of Jewish sovereignty is a very difficult concept to accept for many people, and I think that when you mention about Christianity evolved over the last, a few centuries, and but in the beginning, the idea of replacement theology, the idea that Jews have sinned and therefore, they're no longer the chosen people and they're out, and they've done what's happening to them in 2,000 years of misery in Europe is because of their sins. The idea that they will have sovereignty negates that, but the thing is that Christians evolved. Both the Protestants through the Reformation, but also the Catholic Church through the Vatican, and that's why, as we spoke about, Christians are big lovers and supporters of Israel, and religious Christians and people with the Christian faith are very strong friends. Not all of them, but some of them criticize us, some of them not. But the problem is that Europe, much of Europe is no longer Christian. Much of Europe has not only left Christianity, but is anti-Christianity. The most fundamental religion in the world, in my view, is European atheism, or more precisely, anti-theism. I mean, the horrific image of armed French police, speaking of human rights, your topic, armed French police approaching a woman on the beach and ordering her to take her clothes off for the sole reason that she's Muslim, that is not only a violation of human rights, but that's how we're doing this in the name of anti-religion. I mean, that's how horrible it is. I mean, we know they're not doing that in the name of anti-religion, but that's what they're claiming. They don't go to the Jewish woman, the Orthodox woman, or to the nun. So Europeans and atheists, Europeans who are atheists are stuck. They're sort of like arrested development, in terms of their religious ideas. So the Christians have evolved with the ideas of the church, but some of those, not all of them, but some of those atheists are stuck in the concept of the Middle Ages that Jewish sovereignty is something that negates my own well-being. And I think that is why we're seeing a lot of the attacks against Judaism through Zionism coming from those atheists and anti-theists.
Okay.
Uri
Zaki.
Zaki has used the notion of left and right, and I find that this notion is not helpful when you're studying anti-Semitism or Judophobia, as I prefer to call it, because I see that the philosophers, Kant and Hegel, Voltaire, all of them were Judophobic. They influence, they provide arguments for those who now are called left and right, and many of your socialists, such as Marx, were influenced by Kant and Hegel, and Lenin was hostile to Jews, but Lenin wanted the Jews to severe the people. He didn't want to kill them, just to severe the people. And Stalin was willing to kill the Jews. And Trotsky was more ambivalent and changed.
So what's the question?
This notion that the left, that the right, so-called right, is anti-Semitic or Judophobic, whereas the left, so-called, is not that way. I think it's a false notion. These ideas cut across, the anti-Jewish ideas cut across all these sectors left and right. And I'd like to hear your comment, Mr. Zach, because I think that you have too much belief in the left, and so-called left, as representing decency and so forth, like that.
Okay, I think I got it.
I'll tell the following. If I'll try to elaborate a bit no, I won't elaborate. I'll just clarify what I said before. There is anti-Semitism in the left and in the right. Okay? There's in the left, let's say, the radical left, it's perceived as anti-Zionism, and in the right, it's the old kind of anti-Semitism. At the end of the day, of course, it's not that radical left doesn't have any. It doesn't mean that lefties around the world are necessarily anti-Semites or far from it. Far from it. And it doesn't mean that conservatives around the world are anti-Semites. I haven't said that. I just said that there are anti-Semites in both sides of the aisle. I just wanted to say, because Gal emphasizes the notion of anti-Zionism, that the old kind of anti-Semitism that today, and I think I even said that people who are more intellectual can't afford these days being portrayed as just saying, there's a problem with Jews because they deal with money and stuff like that. Maybe in social media everything happens, but it's not a legitimate thing to say these days. But in the extreme right-wing circles, it is. That's the only thing I said. And I also said that physical violence, at least the big acts we saw in recent years came from those kinds of extreme rightists. And it's in a time that extreme right-wing parties and movements are getting more and more support both in Europe and in the United States. I just said that, okay, we have to be alarmed about this kind of anti-Semitism and also to differentiate between anti-Zionism and criticism about Israel, including, by the way, BDS. Not all BDS supporters are necessarily anti-Zionist. Depends.
The founder of BDS makes it as a stated goal the destruction of the state of Israel.
But again, I didn't. This is taking something and saying, okay, so that means that everybody supports BDS.
The founder of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement has said that the stated goal is the destruction of the state of Israel. Please don't go into BDS. Don't go into BDS.
I will go wherever I want to go, and I'm saying
BDS is not an example of anybody accepting Zionism.
And I'm
they want the destruction of the state of Israel. Don't go there. You're going to lose this argument.
Not necessarily. I do not support, of course, BDS. I think it's something we should fight. But no, you can be loud in your voice and interrupt my presentation. I'll still say that not any criticism, including harsh criticism, including boycott and divesting against Israel, necessarily anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, even if the founder is an anti-Semite.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Okay, I'm just saying that we should not ignore the threats of real neo-fascist groups that are gaining force, and they have the old kind of anti-Semitism, and they have a past of severe violences. We know that. We know our history very well. That's it. That's what I said.
Okay, let's take one more question. I know there's a bunch of hands up. Okay, so let's do this. If you can keep your questions short, like really short, then we're gonna take 3 questions at once. Paz? We're going to take 3 questions at once, and I'm going to allow my guests here to choose to answer any of the questions that they wish. Okay.
Thank you. I want to ask, what is it about the old Hasbara, or what is the old Hasbara which makes it irrelevant or ineffective? And what is the new Hasbara, in addition to calling out anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism?
Okay, that's one. Yes, this gentleman up here. I'll remind you of the questions. You're getting a workout, Paz.
What I wanted to ask about, and nobody's mentioned it here, is this idea of intersectionality. which seems to be dominating a lot of American campuses. Nobody's dealt with that. How do you deal with that? Whereas if you're for LGBT rights, if you're for black rights, if you're for gender equality, somehow, and you're white, somehow you're anti-Israel.
Great question. Okay, last one. We haven't had. Can we have a question from a woman in the audience? No. Okay, so intersection. Okay, this gentleman here. My apologies.
The premise of the book is that Judaism continues to evolve, and that anti-Semitism continues to evolve as it reflects the new Judaism. My question for the panel is, when Judaism reaches Judaism 8.0, what will we call Jew hatred?
Okay. So the first question was about Hasbara. What makes Hasbara, the old Hasbara, irrelevant? And okay.
I think the problem with old Hasbara, I'll just answer quickly 1 and 2. Okay. The problem with old Hasbara is that it's defensive. What do we have to be ashamed of? We should be so proud of what we've created after 2,000 years of exile in this country, fighting wars and creating an incredible economy, an incredible country with wonderful people. So I think that our Hasbara is too defensive, and we should be offensive and proud, and not always on the defense. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing with intersectionality, it's like I live this, because on my Twitter, or whatever it's called now, X, I write proud Zionist and feminist. And you know how many people write to me, you can't be a feminist if you're a Zionist. And on top of all that, because I'm Moroccan, I'm a Jew of color. So this is exactly what I was saying before. I never thought of myself as a Jew of color, but in America, if AOC is a person of color, then I think so am I. She's from Puerto Rico. I'm from Gibraltar. So my whole shtick is that when I was talking about the Sephardi narrative, and I've got a lot of friends fighting that battle in America, people like Chen Mazig, who is gay and, and a Mizrahi Jew, and he's exactly fighting this intersectionality. He's saying, no, we're not all one thing. If you're this, you don't have to be this and this and that. And that's why the Sephardi narrative is important, not because I want to cause disunity. To me, we're the same people. We're all from the same bus from Egypt, okay? But ultimately, if we're going to fight this intersectionality, we need to talk about Mizrahi Jews, and we need to talk about Jews of every type. And this is how you fight that.
You can ask my question about...
I will answer your question, yes, with pleasure. I'm not, you asked about the old Hasbara versus the new Hasbara. And Hasbara is great. I don't have any complaints about the Hasbara. They're doing a great job, including Fleur, and including, you represent we also, and others that represent us and talk to us. I'm just saying that in an environment, like if there were swing voters out there that says, I don't know, should I support Israel or not, then that's effective, but we're not in that environment. Anti-Zionism is too entrenched in the global mindset. And I'm arguing, using Herzl's frameworks, that Hasbara as a discipline has limited effect in countering the lethal threat of anti-Zionism. And that's why I'm offering a paradigm shift. I mean, that's what Herzl did. Herzl said, that's how Herzl got to Zionism, basically, because he concluded that those committees against anti-Semitism are ineffective. Fighting anti-Semitism won't work because you cannot change dogmatic minds, and therefore you need a paradigm shift. And that paradigm shift is the Jewish state, because it will accomplish two things. One, it will create a vehicle to engage with the opposition. And the other thing, which relates to your question, is that the Jewish state will make advancements in humanities that are unimaginable. And therefore you would support the Jewish state, not because you love Jews, because the Jewish state will be the necessity of the world. That's Herzl's views, that's Herzl's words. Jabotinsky and others have said similar things. I think we have reached a point where we have become the necessity of the world when it comes to medicine and all kinds of research, when it comes to cyber, and indeed, as you said, when it comes to the way that we deliberate arguments and ideas. An article about that in the Jerusalem Post a couple of weeks ago. I mean, the world is watching this debate that we're having in Israel, and I think that's a really good way, because look, I mean, there's other debates around the world that are being, with violence and with much more polarization. We're all friends here. We tend to over-polarize it. But, Zionism has basically picked up the role from Judaism in general as a light upon the nations. There's a crisp light that's emanating from Zion across, whether it's research or, social innovations. And that's the ultimate hasbara. The ultimate hasbara is basically, to use the terminology, peace through strength. Meaning, this is what Herzl envisioned, that the world will support a Jewish state because it will be the necessity of the world. And I think, it's not just strength, Fleur, I think vis-a-vis our strong military and our strong, foreign relations that you and others are forming. It is also in terms of our immense contribution to humanity. I think, as I say often, Israel is the tikkun olam state. The world is being repaired from Israel, and that is the ultimate hasbara that is effective. To the second question about intersectionality, I'm glad you asked that, because I have a section in the book about intersectionality. Look, intersectionality is a form of homophobia. If you're a gay person and you're instructed that only because you're gay, you gotta do A, B, and C, then that's homophobia. Intersectionality is a form of racism. If you're a black person, you're supposed to do this, this, and this, and that because the intersectionality police told that's racism. Like, you're an individual, you're not representing, you're a human being, not a black person, just a black person. You're a human being, you're not gay. And the same thing we're seeing, by the way, with the Palestinians. In my other capacity, I have a website called europeandjerusalem.com, where I engage with some of my European diplomatic friends and policymakers, and articles that I write in the Jerusalem Post and elsewhere, where I argue that European colonialism is alive and well, and even white supremacism, because they've been hijacking the Palestinian cause and repackaging it into their own causes. The idea that a Palestinian, you talk about self-determination. If a Palestinian wants to work in SodaStream or in a company that's based in the settlement, that's his choice. It's perfectly legitimate to try to convince these Palestinians not to do that. Don't do that, don't cooperate with the occupation, blah, blah, blah. But it is not legitimate, it is colonialism and white supremacy where you're trying to rob the Palestinians' right to make that decision. And that's what's been happening officially, through official European policies, and certainly through the blanket support that exists in the media, to rob the Palestinian of the individual self-determination to decide if he wants to be mentored in an Israeli high-tech company, if he wants to be engaging with Israelis, if he wants to live in settlements. I mean, Givat Zev, Pisgat Zev, and other neighbors of Jerusalem that are considered by national communities as settlements have, some of them 7%, 8% are Palestinians. You have like a split screen, by the way. Flo is so involved in Abrams Accords and in your work with in promoting this. It was almost like a split screen after the Abrams Accord. You have some Palestinians that says we want that too, but you have the Europeans going to Givat HaMatos. Some of them are my friends. I have to admit, European ambassadors to the Palestinian territories, and saying, no, we're not going to have a joint Israeli-Palestinian neighbors. If you're in Bet Safafa and you want to move there, that's your problem. We're going to rob you of this decision because what? You're not smart enough? So intersectionality is also a form of Islamophobia, and therefore I addressed that in the book. And the third question was, I forgot about... Right, so I'm not a prophet, I don't know, but I think it is safe to say that the opposition to Judaism, as you articulated and as I write in the book, has followed developments in Judaism. So when in Judaism 1.0 anchored in the temple, when the European invaders came here, the Greeks and then the Romans, they destroyed the temples because that was the anchor of Judaism. It was effective. Judaism miraculously, thank God, survived. As Fleur said, God watches us in a hashgacha that's very unique and unpredictable by us, and Judaism transformed. It's astonishing that Judaism transformed into what I call Judaism 2.0. The synagogues replaced the temple, the structural prayers replaced the ritual of the sacrifices, the insular life in the ghetto replaced life in Judea, and the ritualistic yearning to Zion replaced the physical presence in Jerusalem. Well, guess no. Now we're back. We're back in Zion. And that same opposition followed us here. What would happen in the past, in the future, like as Judaism will transform to something else, I don't know. But I think that's way long in the future. But right now, the Judaism is, we're back. More and more Jews and non-Jews relate to Judaism through Israel and Zionism, and therefore the opposition to Judaism and Zionism has followed it, and more of the opposition is funneled through Zionism.
Just an anecdote. You said you're a Jew of color because you're from Morocco originally. I used to piss off my associate, who was a liberal Jew in Washington, D.C., that if I'll naturalize in the United States, I'll be African American, because my dad is from Egypt. She used to go, "What? How are you saying that?" Yeah, I'm kidding. I'll take the question about Hasbara. I'm not a prophet either, and besides, I don't want to relate to. We're an evening discussion on anti-Semitism, but I don't want to relate to Judaism through its haters, but rather through what we do and how we do it. But regarding Hasbara, again, a part that I don't like about what your message is that it's determined. Nothing can be changed. I've seen a change for the worse. It's true in the last decade, but also the Israeli policy, and especially those who must bereave it, have gone worse in their bluntness and what comes out of Israel. Listen, I believe that the situation in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria is an existential threat to the state of Israel more than anything. Because my lesson from Herzl is, and followed by Weizmann, Jabotinsky, Begin, Ben Gurion, Burl, you name it, is that Zionism stands on 2 feet, on 2 pillars. One pillar is the pillar of Jewish self-determination, our national homeland, but the second pillar is democracy. And if you control militarily another people who are controlled by the might of your arms, that's not democratic. And if those people and under the area you control are the majority, and we're getting there, it depends how you define Gaza, then that's a big problem for one of the 2 pillars of Zionism. And it's very hard to make Hasbara on something that is true. And we can always say, even don't get me wrong, I don't like to talk in populist and in sismaot, okay? But if I'll take South Africa, and I'm not saying we're not like South Africa. South Africa was not the biggest human rights violator in the African continent, not at all. During the time of South Africa, you had much worse regimes in Africa. You still do. But South Africa was targeted because they were part of the Western world at the end of the day. And this is also part of the situation. I don't want to be compared to Syria, not at all. And I think the biggest Hasbara will be to make efforts and to show we're making efforts to end the situation, this horrible situation in Judea and Samaria. First of all, because it's important to us. First and foremost, if I would have thought that everything is okay there and it's not an existential threat,
So we'll deal with what are the criticism around the world. But I think that's one of the biggest existential threats on the state of Israel. Now I also include the internal one, more than Iran, both of them. But if we believe there is a problem, we have to show that we want to solve it. And I think that's the biggest Hasbara problem we have, not anything else.
I think we tried a few times.
Okay, so right at the end, Uri says at the risk of opening a whole other debate, which we're not going to have right now. I do want to just say, actually, just a comment on the internet section anti-point very, very quickly. It also relates to the right-left thing we had before. One of the problems I think that Jews have facing anti-Semitism from the right and the left is that on the far right, Jews can never be white, right? We can never be part of the white race, not particularly necessarily want to be white race defined by the far right anyway, but certainly as far as the far right are concerned, we are not white, whereas on the far left, we are ultra white, right? We are so white that A, we're oppressing the blacks here in Israel, right? The blacks being Palestinians in this rather odd sort of play that they do. And also, of course, we're white people who dare to suggest that we are also persecuted, that we also suffer persecution and racism. So I think that's also an interesting sort of dichotomy that Jews face in the diaspora, at least on these issues. Anyway, I want to thank Gal first and foremost, of course, Fleur and Uri, thank you so much for joining us and contributing your thoughts, including disagreeing and arguing, which is in a civil way, which is great. Thank you everyone for coming. We have another of these debates. First, we're going to have many more events at the Begin Centre, so keep an eye on our social media and our website for those events, and those of you on my mailing list. You'll get the information from me. If you're not on my mailing list, email me, paulg@begincentre.org.al. We have another of these debates on the 18th